I am Sameer, a PhD scholar from Center for European Studies. As India looks towards 2047, the ambition to become a developed economy represents not just a domestic milestone, but a transformation with global consequences. This session examines how India's economic growth can reshape the international economic architecture. We are privileged to have with us Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, as part of this panel. Welcome, sir. Dr. Nageswaran will chair this session. Sir. We welcome Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. He is joined by Professor Prabir De from Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. Professor De is the founding editor of the Journal of Asian Economic Integration, published by SAGE. Welcome, Professor De. To join them, we have Professor Amita Batra. Professor Batra is a professor at the Center for South Asian Studies, SIS JNU, and has widely acclaimed expertise on international trade and related policy issues and regional economic integration in South and Southeast Asia. I now request Professor Preeti Singh to welcome our panelists with flowers and mementos as a token of appreciation. I now request Dr. Nageswaran to take over the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everybody, and my sincere thanks to the organizers of this two-day conference to have me over here. In general, I have noticed that chairpersons tend to feel a bit left out because their job is mainly to moderate and ask questions. Therefore, they end up using their opening remarks slot to make their own statement. I will refrain from doing so because both my good friend and fellow panelist Sanjeev Sanyal and I have to go for another appointment at 1 o'clock. And since we are running behind time, I'm going to avoid introducing the panelists. I'm sure it is part of the conference proceedings, their profile. In any case, as the announcement was made, each of them are well-known luminaries and experts in their respective fields. This particular session is about India's economic ascent and the implications for the world. So there is a certain assumption behind, or a presumption behind this statement, that there is an India's economic ascent and therefore how the world should react. But we can actually say that the statement is worthy of a discussion here. Post-COVID, yes, we have grown very well. And other countries have found it difficult to maintain their pre-COVID growth rates. On the contrary, India has actually grown much faster post-COVID than the 3-4 years preceding the COVID year. And this year we have received 3 credit rating upgrades from different agencies, 2 from USA, 1 from Japan. And until recently, the stock market capitalization was in the top 3 in the world. So we have quite a few important milestones and achievements to say that the journey is on the right track. And in terms of purchasing power parity estimates, we are already the world's third largest economy. However, in terms of actual nominal numbers, we are on our way to becoming the fourth largest, but in per capita terms, we lag behind other countries quite significantly. So you can make arguments on both sides, and that is what I expect my panelists to do so. Given the limited time we have, I'll invite the three panelists to make opening statements of around 10 minutes, but definitely not more than that. They are more than welcome to keep it under 10, but not over 10. And what I'll do is, as soon as they finish their opening remarks, I might ask a question or two very quickly, and just about invite one question from the audience for that particular panelist, simply not for you to hold back your question and make it more interactive. Otherwise, you will be looking at your screen and we will be having a conversation here among ourselves, right? So we want to make it more interactive. So there will be 10 minutes, couple of questions from me immediately, and question or comment. If you are making a comment, by all means do so. You don't have to have a question, but if it is a comment, please make it short. It shouldn't be an alternative panelist from this side of the aisle. Okay? So with that, I think I'm going to invite Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, the member Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and a good friend of mine who thinks about these issues much more than most people. So Sanjeev, the floor is yours. As you please, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, we'll just speak from here. That'll reduce the interchanges. I'm not going to speak for 10 minutes. My comment is basically the issue at hand is really about how the world treats the rise of India as a global power. Now, you're right, Anant, that of course in per capita terms we are still far away. But I think rising as a global power is a much more about the bulk of India and its importance in the world. So, poor as we may be, just by virtue of the fact that we have a large population and just large, it is quite clear to me that we can now fairly say that as in nominal terms become the world's fourth largest economy, in PPP terms the world's third largest economy, and certainly by the end of the decade we will be at number 3 on both counts, that we matter in the world. I think that is a fair thing to say. Now, as we rise, of course, how do we begin to influence the rest of the world? One is obviously the sheer size of an economy matters because people export to us, they import from us. We begin to now bend many of the sort of set power dynamics of the world. And I think that is already beginning to happen. Now, an important thing in this context is to remember that nobody is going to be terribly pleased about giving us space as this happens. This includes those countries that may otherwise be friendly towards us. So you have to remember that just like in an individual, when you begin to get more successful, the people who are likely to initially be very supportive will after a while, especially your own friends and family will begin to becoming a little more uncomfortable with the fact that you are becoming more successful. This is also true of nations. So in this context, the question that arises is that how should we respond to this phenomena? My own thing is that we should not, first of all, slow down just because other people are uncomfortable. That would be a loser's perspective. In any case, for far too long, India has punched below its weight category. So, even if we are just punching at our weight category and others are uncomfortable about it, well, we just have to thicken our skin and, in a sense, get others to accommodate this. Now, the obvious manifestation of this right now that we are facing is the US tariff issue that is on the top of everybody's mind. And this is a good example of how we here in India have been dealing with this. It is not an issue that we have caused. It is also not a situation where we are trying to escalate anything. If you have noticed, our response by and large, even when there are close advisors to the US president who make snide remarks, sometimes what could be even deemed as racist remarks against India, we have in general been quite restrained. The fact that we are restrained, however, does not mean that we are backing down. And in this, again, notice our behavior is quite different than what many other large countries in the world have done. And under the pressure, whether it's the European Union or Japan or many other countries, have essentially bent backwards. We have been holding steady. So the point is, our current strategy is do not escalate matters, but at the same time, if it's a reasonable thing that we are asking for, do not back down. And this is something that we have to, in a sense, get used to doing. Because if we develop the reputation of somebody who backs down with at every step, then let me say that there are many other things on which we will be made to back down. And indeed, over the last 78 odd years as a free country, we have been actually quite apologetic about many, many things. I think the time has come to stop being so. Now, this does not mean that we should be, adding fuel to the fire in various things. Clearly not. But at the same time, it does mean that we should stand up for our interests and interests of about 1/6 of the world's population. What is good for us is good for humanity as a whole. And I don't think we should in some way be apologetic about standing up for what India and Indians and their interests are. So I'm going to stop there with just one comment. It's saying that, look, our rise in the world will have implications for us. It will also have implications for other people. At every stage, we should remember that no rising power has been given the space. They've had to make that space in various ways. Some has been more difficult than others. When the British rose up as a great power, they had to actually go through decades of war with Napoleon. When the Russians rose, they had to, conquer their way all the way through to Alaska and stand up to the then great powers in Crimea. The Germans had to win the Franco-Prussian wars. The Japanese had to defeat the Russians in 1905. The Americans had to win 2 world wars. The Chinese had to stand up to the Americans in Korea and then in Vietnam. We are just having to stand up to President Trump. So, fact is, we will do what is reasonable for our interests. As I mentioned again, we have no interest in unnecessarily escalating or aggravating things, but that does not mean that we do not understand what is in our interest or that we will not stand up for it. And yes, if there are reasonable trade-offs to be made, we will make them. But they have to be reasonable, and the net benefit should be clearly positive for us as a country. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think Sanjeev has really set the tone. He said he will speak for only 8 minutes, but he even gave back a minute even from that parsimonious commitment of his. But the contents were not parsimonious for sure. They were quite clear. I just have a couple of questions. I think towards the end you made some very punchy observations by saying everybody had to. It was not given to them on a platter. They had to fight for it. And you gave plenty of examples. You said we have to make space for ourselves. And one example you gave was, like right now we are standing up to somebody else's pressure tactics. Is there anything? So my first question to you is there anything else that we need to do, like other countries did, apart from the current, our response to the tariff situation, to make the space for ourselves? That's question number one. And question number two is kind of related to the first one. And you made an earlier remark saying we should not slow down, we should not punch below our weight, and we should get others to accommodate us. can you give us some kind of specific illustration on getting others to accommodate us? So both the questions are related. Over to you.
Yeah, so the first and most important thing, before we do anything else, is to first begin to have a narrative of ourselves as a people. This is something very important because this relates to something that my friend Manjul is sitting right in the front seat here, talked about in the previous session, and I work with him on, by the way, upgrading the NCERT textbooks. Now, this is an important because, you see, for far too long, we were willing to accept the narratives of others. And somehow very apologetic if we ever made any changes to it. That somehow it would be jingoistic or something wrong about the fact that Indians may have a story to tell about themselves. But in fact, the sense of ourselves is an important thing. This does not mean that we have to somehow go off kilter with something that is not based on facts and properly researched and rhetoric, but that is not to be construed as an argument for not having any indigenous worldview at all. And I think that is an important thing. And Manjul just talked about how to do this in one tiny field, which is mathematics, how our entire worldview of how mathematics evolved has been told to us from a colonial perspective. So the first point is we need to have a narrative, and I'm not just taking historical narrative, but also on other things. For example, the way we get judged on, say, democracy index or freedom index, or even the sovereign ratings, these are ways in which we get judged by the rest of the world and we accept it. By the way, since I am in an academic setup, and I happen to be chancellor of a university as well, a thing that I face all the time is that the way to get promoted in Indian academia is to get published in journals which are rated by the ABDC system, which is an external system. So we still live in a world where external validation is what drives the way we progress. So this is an important thing, and this then filters through to other things. We do need to have our own social media platforms. We need to have certain amount of indigenous capabilities in various technologies. Again, I am not advocating going back to the ambassador car, but I am advocating, and by the way, even the ambassador car was imported technology. It's just that we gave it some sort of an iconic status. So this is not a case for sort of closing down in our minds in any way, but we do need to, at least in key areas, create our own capabilities. The way we, for example, do environment, social and governance frameworks, we need to create our own frameworks. So I think first thing is build our own frameworks. The other question that
How do we get others to accommodate us? So that's the point you made.
So which is a parallel thing, that as we become more confident of ourselves and our own narratives about ourselves, I think we should be confident enough to also stand up in the world and tell it. So I think there are other things, of course, the hard power of actual trade, even military power, all of these hard powers are an important way of getting others to accommodate you, and at some point, at certain situations, these may be relevant. But I think a lot of it has to do with asking others and getting them to understand that what we are asking, the space that we are asking for in the world, is a reasonably legitimate demand.
Thank you, Sanjeev. So I think when you talk about creating framework, our own framework, there's also an implication there. Like, for example, in the case of journal articles, etc., the ABDC process which we have to sort of meet, then the question is we have to evolve our own standards which are not only comparable to but even better than the international standards, which means we also have to invest in quality and innovation to be taken seriously by others and also more importantly by ourselves. And I expect Dr. Amita Batra to comment on that. But as I said earlier in my opening remarks, if you have a couple of short questions, you can direct them to Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal right now. Anybody, the person here and the one and the lady behind him, please keep it short and introduce yourself.
Or should we do it all in the end?
No, it's good to break the Yeah, so I'm setting my own framework, she said, yeah.
Just say it loudly.
Yeah. I think we can hear you, yeah.
Hello, I'm Ashutosh from China Policy. It's a private research firm out of Australia. My question is about when we talk about India-China relations, we generally talk about goods trade deficit, but I want to talk about services trade. From 2021, PRC services trade nearly doubled, comprising of 1/8 of the total trade. NDRC research document are constantly mentioning services trade as untapped potential. Just 2 weeks back, they also identified the sectors in services trade. Our research shows they are going to massively invest in services trade in the coming years, and they don't see it as separate,
So you have to come to the
goods and
question, yeah,
services.
yeah.
So I just want to know what's the plan for this. Thank you.
For plan by India?
Yeah.
Okay, so the second question, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm Prachi, a master's student from SIS. I have a philosophical background. Basically, I have done my graduate from DU. And I have this question, which has been like a pressing question on my mind. We have been teaching Indian philosophical schools from a Western perspective, even like today in our graduation programs. When do we reach that point when we start teaching it from like an Indic perspective, we can call it? Because we had some students who came from other countries to learn it from the Indian perspective, and it turned out that we are being taught from the Western perspective.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, that's all.
Okay, you'll have to remind me the second question because I'll deal with the first. See, you're absolutely right that the goods and services at a meta level sometimes cannot be separated. In India, the way things have worked out, they are almost in separate compartments. Goods are textiles or whatever it is, and then there is services, IT services and so on, tourism or whatever. The way, however, the world works, and China is a very good example of this, is that they have combined it in very interesting ways. And I'm going to use illustration of shipping services as a good example of this. So 95% of India's trade is carried in foreign ships. Okay, Indian-owned Indian flagships, we only have about 480 of them, and even a smaller number of them is actually big ships. These are relatively small ships. So we are effectively one of our biggest, I think maybe possibly our second biggest import after oil is actually shipping-related services. Now, some part of it is, of course, insurance and things like that, most of which goes through the West. But the hardcore shipping part of it, a very large part of it is now being delivered not just to India, but to the world by Chinese ships. Right. They build 60% of the world's ships. Their carriers are increasingly them, and now they're getting into all the other peripheral services as well. Maintenance and everything. So, you are absolutely right. We need to begin to think about this in different way. You will be, however, pleased to know that we are putting in a huge amount of effort into getting into shipbuilding and that entire space. Just in the last 24 months, we have changed 4 of the main maritime-related laws. They were passed end of last year or early this year. 2 weeks ago, a 70,000 crore package has been given to shipbuilding. We are creating a national fleet of some sort. Our shipbuilding yards, which till about 2 years ago were basically going empty, are packed orders. So we too are thinking new and responding to this kind of thing. So it's not the case that we are not responding and thinking about it. But yes, we cannot wish away the fact that China has done this in completely different scales, and there is no doubt about that, and there's something to be admired about it. Now, as far as the second question is concerned, you're absolutely right. Now, I don't know much about all the Indian schools, but I do happen to have some knowledge of the Nyaya school. Now, the Nyaya school, for those who do not know, is the rationalist school of Hindu philosophy, and basically it is Nyaya. The word Nyaya, by the way, is common parlance, is used to mean justice. In fact, it does not mean justice. It merely means the process of arriving at the truth. And so there was a well set up system called Nyaya, and then upgraded in the medieval period to Navanyaya, which basically allows you to arrive at the truth. And so basically what it does, it creates a formal system of logic by which It states these are the allowed kinds of proof or evidence. Based on this evidence, this is the way you can arrive at certain conclusions. This is what it states. So what are the kinds of evidence? You can have direct evidence because you saw something. You can have evidence because you can infer it from something. You can quote an authority who may have know something, and so on. So there are certain kinds of evidence, and then there is a logical way of arriving at what is considered to be truth. Now, this is an extremely interesting way of thinking about the world. You may think it's trivial, but it's not, because it actually provides us with a framework for doing something that we now need to do with AI. AI is generating so much material in the world that being able to tell what is actually true is now a non-trivial thing. Establishment of what is actually facts is already become an issue that artificial intelligence and those dealing with artificial intelligence are having to deal with. Now, they are creating certain algorithms. Now, interestingly, Nyaya provides one way of truthifying, right? So, just as an example, these are useful tools, but you're right, we do not teach it from our own perspective, which is the point about our own narratives. And by the way, since I have Manjul here, one more thing for us to do.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to pass the floor on to Dr. Amita Batra, and we'll mix between.
That's your own framework.
Yes, men and women, and then back to Dr. Prabir Dey. So please, over to you. It is. You have to just wait here.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nageswaran, for introducing this new framework here, which seems to be very, very different from what we've been used to, but nonetheless very, very interesting, I would say, My emphasis, I think I'm going to draw upon some things that were said yesterday and add a little bit of my own to talk about India's ascent and how it should be preparing for the global order, while picking up also from the title of the conference. I think three words that the EM had mentioned yesterday, were demand, demography, and data. And I would just like to change that data to digitalization, which I think three areas, where we do take India's own story internally, domestically, to be very, very significant, and having made a very significant contribution to its growth process in the last 70, almost 80 years now, that we've had. And also include in this, I'll go back and forth a little, in the sense of another idea that was put forward in terms of what India should be doing in the emerging global order, which was in terms of pushing for multilateralism. How should we do that? And what has been our role so far? And lastly, I think I would like to talk about certain paradigm shifts that we've seen in our economic ascent, in our economic journey in the last eight odd decades, So starting with what we have as how we have proceeded as far as these last 78 years of our journey of economic growth are concerned, I think I would say that the demarcation, moving away from the demarcation that in the academic literature is provided to us in the late 70s, mid-1980s, and so on, I think the big demarcation that we see is when the systemic reforms in India's growth story happened, which was 1991. And this is where I want to draw your attention to the first paradigm shift that was made in terms of really opening up the Indian economy to the rest of the world. When we talk about India's participation in the global order, we talk about India's engagement with the global order. It is through this that is opening up to the world economy that we really see our participation increasing with the world, both in terms of the extent to which we trade, that is, as far as India's trade with its partners is concerned, but also in terms of India's engagement at the multilateral level with the global organization, that is the World Trade Organization. And, differing a little from what was said by by Sanjeev earlier, I would say that not only did we punch according to our weight as far as this period of post-1990s is concerned at the WTO, but I think we punched really hard to get our position, or to make our position very, very clear, So I think as far as India's engagement with the world is concerned, that has been consonant with its high rate of growth that was experienced post-1990s, and B, with the extent to which it has been open to engage with the world in economic terms. To this, I would say, I would just take you to the present, and say that as far as the present is concerned, engaging with the world today is being considered very, very difficult, because I think the global order is in complete disarray. When it comes to trade, when it comes to global trade organization, we know that it has been it has been weakening. There has been a decimation as far as the most important aspect of that World Trade Organization is concerned, which is the dispute settlement mechanism, and which has been led by the erstwhile leader of the liberal order, which is the United States. And not only has the United States done that damage to the international organization, it is going further to damage the international system in terms of violating completely what is at the core of the international system, that is the MFN, or the most favored nation system of imposing or implementing the tariffs. The world is in a fix. India is also in a difficult position at this point of time. But I think when we talk about the ascent, I would want to emphasize that the high rate of growth that India reveals at this point of time, with a certain degree of stability in terms of its macro fundamentals, whether it be in terms of the current account deficit, whether it be in terms of inflation, fiscal deficit consolidation, though I think further consolidation as well as reduction in public debt would help, but we are not getting into those details. But I think it's important that India, exercise its position that it has in terms of growth, stability, and accordingly make its place in the global order, The global order is in disarray, we know that, So there has to be a role that India needs to play in the multilateral organization. And B, as far as India's own interests are concerned, I think we need to take it forward by engaging with the world. These two strands, I think I'll just spend a little more time on these. That is, as far as the engaging with the world, as far as India's own interaction is concerned, its own exports are concerned, and openness is concerned. I think from the 1990s, when we opened up, reduced our tariffs significantly, I think it was a dramatic reduction as far as our tariffs were concerned, quantitative restrictions, and any other restrictions that came in the way of industrial growth were done away with. We have, in the last few years, I think, moved a little away from that in terms of having increased our average MFN tariffs. And I think that has done, while the domestic industry has grown to a certain extent, on the basis of domestic demand, it is the global demand, it is the external demand that has been a missing component or a weak component as far as our growth process is concerned. And the external sector demand is important not just for creating demand, but also for making the manufacturing sector more competitive. And that I think also brings me to another core of the growth process in India, where growth, we are back to close to 8% in the last few years. This year, I don't know. It's going to be difficult. We're probably going to have moving according to different estimates, anything between 5.5 to 6.5 or 6.7. But I think it is the core manufacturing sector that continues to be a lagging sector in our growth process. The maximum proportion of growth that has been coming in the last 20 years has been coming from the services sector. And services sector, while it's great to have services sector contribute to the growth process as well as to exports, our engagement with the world, but the services sector does not create employment for what is the larger what we have as the other component of our growth process, demography. If we really want to exploit the demographic dividend that the demographic profile of India gives it, I think it's very, very important that we enhance our manufacturing capabilities. And that can happen through 2 or 3 things. One, that we emphasize exports in our growth process. The emphasis on exports as far as growth process is concerned has to come through to a very large extent by attracting foreign direct investment that is export oriented, or exposing our own domestic industry to competition that comes from the outside. Keeping ourselves open, lowering comprehensive review, I would say, of the tariff structure as far as India is concerned, I think is critical to its enhancement of its manufacturing competitiveness at this point of time. And that is what will bring not just export-oriented FDI to India, but will also help increase manufacturing competitiveness, enhance the manufacturing sector contribution to GDP, and thereby also create employment, which we see largely today in the informal sector. I think 90% of the total employment comes from the informal sector, which does not bode well for any growing economy. So I think we need to focus on that. The last point, do I have a... the last point, as far as the WTO is concerned, I think, as I said, post-1990s, we've made ourselves, our presence felt in the international organization. Not just significantly, but I think we did at one point become the voice of the Global South, The voice of the Global South, I say that, Global South today is a term that is being contested. I'm not getting into that. But we did become a representative of the interests of the lesser developed countries, you see. And that is where our focus has been for a very long time, though varied in terms of where is it that our national interests lay at different points of time. But I think this is where we need to also bring about a shift in our approach to participating in the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization itself is at a point, you see, where it needs a lot of reform, where it needs support for just standing in, just kind of being there as an organization that can manage and that can still set the rules for global trade. Because you have the lead economy violating every single fundamental principle of the WTO. How do we do that, and why do we need to do that? We need to do that because it is only the global organization that can help set rules that benefit every country, we do have the development of the plurilateral system, which I think India should also engage with, because that's the way to go forward in terms of setting rules as far as the newer areas are concerned. We need to set our own frameworks in these areas, but we also need to engage with the world and with the global organization and with those who are interested in these specific areas to take forward and to merge or to draw upon what is being done in the world and develop accordingly. These are important elements in the growth process, important elements as far as our own trade agreements with the rest of the world was concerned. I think we've mentioned the ESG, the environment, sustainable governance frameworks. Yes, we need to develop our own, but I think we also need to incorporate to the extent that we can in our trade agreements so that we are able to do trade agreements and find markets for ourselves at this point of time when I think the United States is making it increasingly difficult as the largest market to continue to be in that position. Last point, as far as the trade agreements are concerned, I do have to compliment our government in terms of the India-UK FTA, which I think is the most comprehensive. We've made a start by incorporating some of the elements that one has been saying are very useful and need to be there to diversify into different markets, to intensify our effort to be a part of the global value chains. I think, and I hope we will take it forward in these future agreements, particularly with the European Union, and maybe even hope to be a part of the CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement on Trans-Pacific Partnership. Thank you.
Dr. Amita Batra is focused on the trade aspect of India's Ascent. Just very quick question for her. You said, we have, in the last few years, India's MFN tariff rates have gone up. But it is also the period when every country put up its trade restrictions. If you look at the number of trade restrictions around the world, since 2016, they have doubled to around 6,000 trade restrictions in total around the world, compared to an average of 3,000 trade restrictions per year between countries. So, when somebody is competing with another formidable manufacturing power, which uses both explicit and implicit subsidies, what are the options do countries really have? That is question number one. And second, you also seem to imply in your remarks that we not only punched at our weight, but we punched hard in WTO, etc. So are you seeking a qualitative shift in the way we engage with WTO? In other words, should we be seen only as a rebel all the time, or should we also be seen as an enabler? Is that what you are trying to say? These are my two questions to you. So if you could keep your answers brief, then we can take some couple of questions from the audience as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly on the first, that is trade restrictions. Two parts to this. As far as tariffs are concerned, if we look across comparator set of developing countries, you will see that their MFN tariffs, average MFN tariffs, particularly in the manufacturing sector, are way lower than ours and have been continuously declining as against ours, which have actually seen an increase, although we've also brought about a reduction in the last two budgets. Particularly in the last budget, I think we've seen a significant reduction in some cases, especially aimed at integration with global value chains. I'm hopeful that we will carry forward that exercise, and I'm also hopeful that the promised review of the tariff structure will be taken forward. As far as trade restrictions are concerned, many of these being in the sense of morphed as non-tariff barriers, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at the data and the analysis, you will see that the impact as far as the global trade and global GDP is concerned, more so global trade is concerned, the impact has been just about 1% or so, That's the kind of analysis that we see across the world. So yes, restrictions are coming up, but there are also, trade continues to happen. And trade continues to happen at a positive rate of growth, with these restrictions having very little or minor impact as far as global trade is concerned. These are the estimates that we have. On WTO, yes, I would not just want us to be an enabler, but I would want us to be a participant in the process as it is evolving. I think we have to give up our stiff position of always being a representative of the developing countries. It is our own interest, and we have to see how we promote our own interest at every level, be that a trade agreement or be that the multilateral level, Hence the engagement in plurilaterals. Participate, express, how do we see it to be different from what our interests are, and how do we bring in our interests, I think is the most important element of, or should be the most important element of our engagement with the WTO at this time.
I think Dr. Batra has thrown an important idea, proposition in front of the audience, that should we always be looking ourselves as a voice of the Global South in WTO, whatever the term Global South means, but also should we be therefore batting more for what is in our interest, and therefore what kind of calibration that would require in our stance on WTO matters. I think that is a good topic in and of itself for discussion. I'll just take one or maximum two questions depending on how brief and efficient the question is. Over there. I just happened to see them first, so I'll come to you. So one question there.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Myself, Sagar Kumar, pursuing PhD in International Legal Studies from CILS. Background is my I have done LLB and LLM from Delhi University, particularly working in international trade. So my question is, ma'am, you talk about the MFN principle. So as we all know, with respect, though there are different platforms as we go through the trade and investment, but when we talk about the MFN clause with respect to the investment agreement, specifically, India in 2015 removed the MFN clause from the Model Bilateral Investment Treaty. So now, India, after 10 years has been passed, so how long is it going to be take, and what is the take that India is going to sign bilateral investment treaties with respect to, if I may use the term, first world countries? So that, and also, what is the policy impact? And third, is there any increase of foreign direct investment?
I think we should just keep your question to one or two. This is the third question as part of one question.
My only question is, how far is going to India will take to sign bilateral investment treaties with the first world countries?
Okay, thank you. Ma'am. Your mic is there. Mic is.
So loud generally. Amita, it was a great pleasure listening to you. Thank you, Chair. And my name is Vijay Lakshmi. I was a former professor at SIS, and I still continue to head the Department of Geopolitics at Manipal. And so there is a question from, for me, even for Mr. Sanyal as well, but I didn't get the chance. The question of India being a voice for the South in multilateral institutions in a developing multipolar world. So the ideas of multilateralism, institutionalization of IR, as well as the developing multipolarity, which necessitates plurilaterals and minilaterals and all of that. How do we then navigate to make others accommodate us? Because even in WTO, even if you want to go against, and I think that's one problem, I don't think if you're going to just speak for yourself, then the support that you might want might be a problem. But yes, I do see the point of how we should defend our own interests.
Thank you.
So,
I think.
sir, there's also one
Okay.
last point, which is how do you deal with the United States? You want to do it bilaterally or multilaterally? Thank you.
Oh, both are great questions. In fact, if Dr. Batra feels that the second question, the first question of hers can be thrown open to all the panelists, we can take it later also. So I leave it to you.
Okay, I mean, we can leave it to the rest of the panelists to respond to the first. The BIT question, I think Dr. Nageswaran is better placed to respond to how are we going to and when are we going to sign the investment treaties. BIT, one has been asking for a BIT 2016 review. I think that's also been promised in the budget. And as you say, it's happening. I can take your word for it?
Yes.
Okay. So the 2016 model BIT is being revised, which I think is a great thing. And I hope we will have components, which will bring in the investments, foreign direct investments particularly, and will also help us to sign more comprehensive trade agreements, that is larger trade agreements with particularly the developed world, as was your question. Second question, as far as the US is concerned, we need to deal with it bilaterally, and we need to have a deal with the US. It's not like we can't have, or we shouldn't be, interacting or be negotiating with the United States. A trade deal at the end of the day is absolutely necessary. As has been reported, I'm not privy to the negotiations, that we will have a trade deal by November, which I think seems to be a reasonable time. But I think here it's important to consider 2 or 3 aspects. One, we have to realize and accept that there are certain bottom lines, that we have in terms of negotiating with a developed economy. And unlike many of the other economies, we cannot afford to give a zero rate of tariff for all commodities, because we have a livelihood question. And even as far as dairy is concerned, we do have a livelihood question in both agriculture and dairy. My own view as far as these 2 sectors are concerned, particularly dairy is concerned, is also probably to bring in the tariff rate quotas, which would allow us to probably open up a little more as far as our negotiations are concerned. But bilateral is the way to go forward. And I also think that one has to also accept the fact that as far as the trade deals that are being done by the United States are concerned, there are no legal texts to these trade agreements as of now. And even what is being called a trade agreement or a trade deal is, it's unraveling, it's being renegotiated. Look at what's happened in Japan, the political repercussions of what's been dealt with, or the manner in which the deal has been done with the United States. Korea is still negotiating. Korea is at a very, very difficult time, with the United States asking for the promised investment fund to be given in cash right away. So there are demands that are unreasonable, and hence you will see, I think it is a difficult process of negotiation, but nonetheless, it needs to be done because we do have sectors, for example, shrimp, textiles, footwear, gems and jewelry, where you have US to be the largest market. And at present, the diversification will take some time. For us to diversify and find other markets, and establish ourselves in other markets is going to take time. But so you have to, for the time being, negotiate with the United States, continue to negotiate, and hope for a deal soon enough.
Thank you very much, Dr. Batra. So now I turn to the last panelist, Dr. Prabir. Over to you.
you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure coming to JNU. And I congratulate SIS for its 70th celebration. Also thanks CRF for the co-partner. Well, I'm the last speaker and most of it has already been discussed. So, but before I coming out, some of the recommendations and discussions, challenges that for India's Ascent to the next 20 to 21 years. If you look at our External Affairs Minister's speech yesterday and also his earlier speeches, that he divided, 6 phases of Indian foreign policy. It's the last one, which requires a special mention. He said the 2014 onward, it is basically India he looks at as an energetic diplomacy. And then he kept on, discussing about why and which way we are moving. And those may not, I just skip for the sake of time. But going by Mr. Sanyal and Professor Batra, that India is a significant global player and it is a multipolar world. And if you look at the recent publications by K.L. Krishna, B.N. Goldar, and Dibyendu Maiti, it's a book on 75 years of India's independence, productivity, growth, and development, came out in the Springer. It also divided, just like EAM, splitted the phases of development. Some economists also looked at what kind of phases that we had in the past and what's the way forward. So they look at that 2008 onwards, basically India, as they explain it, is the phase of a deglobalization. And I can see the connects between the External Affairs Minister and the editors and the books which they edited. Now, in the book, there is a very rich chapter on the TFP, Total Factor Productivity Growth. And if I may quote the number, 2080 onwards till 2007, the average TFP is basically 2%. And the data available to the researchers, the first chapter, it indicates that 2008 to 2019, before COVID, India's aggregate TFP has gone down slightly, marginally. A marginal reduction means a lot. Yeah, total factor productivity, yeah. And well, thereafter data is not available, we can't calculate. But what it indicates that we need to do a lot of retrospection in the country. I'm sure this has been done in very many ways by the eminent speakers here. But if I put it as a concluding remarks in this occasion, that if we start with the Green Revolution and then how it moved us, strengthening our foundation here. Like you agree with me, there's an additional capital expenditure, infrastructure building, particularly after 1991, then which kept on adding our national strength, security part of it. We added lots of strength as a security, on strategic heft as an India, as a nation. And rising FDI, trade, that story, we know about it. But what it comes that before and during the British India, we are fairly enjoying laissez-faire. We are fairly open, we were connected to the world, then we got disconnected. And 1991, the story unfolded. And what we see, towards the 8 onward, that's the phase of deglobalization, and what External Affairs Minister is talking about, energetic diplomacy in 2014 onward, that India is starting getting in regional power and going to the global power. Niti Aayog telling us, through their study, that 30 trillion by 2047, the Viksit Bharat, 4 trillion is the current dollar price, the GDP size. And certainly, this is a big challenge. And some of our numbers indicating that if we do a heavy lifting, like 10% GDP growth every year, 30 trillion is achievable, but world order is very much uncertain. You really do not know in which way we will be moving at. Mr. Chair will be knowing it much better than me. High sources of tax and non-tax revenue, and so on and so forth. But one just food for thought, that if we have a 50% openness, today India's openness is about 50% roughly trade openness. It's giving us 1.63 trillion total trade, 2023-24 number I have. And if we go for 2047, 30 trillion, with a 60% openness, just adding 10 more percentage point, it's going to have a total trade, 20 trillion. That's a big target for us. And I'm very positive, and we are discussing it's possible. And because I see a huge amount of progress has been done, again in relative term on social sector, particularly access to the basic health, access to education. So social sector strength empowering us, plus economic progress, new thinking, new ideas, the digital reforms, digital public infrastructure, payments, cross-border, UPI, etc., GVC linkages, these are supporting our foundations. I just come to this, kind of conclusions. In the rise of India, way towards the Viksit Bharat, I think, the questions that I always ask myself, is it going to be very inclusive type of, because we have lots of MSMEs we are kept out. If you travel 50 kilometers from Delhi, you see the kind of stories. We have a huge informal sector, unorganized sector, a lot of marginalized people. We're trying bringing them in the growth process. So this is what will be a big challenge. Well, the progress, phenomenal things they have done, the reforms, domestic reform, which Mr. Sanyal has written extensively. But we haven't done much on investment facilitation. Perhaps the questions which came, the investment agreement, etc., etc. Two things which came out in the discussion, like the voice of global south, multilateral reforms process, digital transformations, and demographic dividends. These are something that we enjoy. I conclude, by saying that there are challenges which economists cannot forecast. We'll always look for some more wider stakeholders' engagement, like climate and disaster, health-wise, the pandemic, war, supply chain disruptions that we have huge, good numbers, and our center-state relations. You must be knowing that if you put a straight line from Delhi all the way to the south, and if you face to the south, your right side doing pretty well. They are, the cream, good part of India. But if you look at the left side, I have some reservation, like that. Yeah. So how you bring the states in your development process, that also matters very much. And of course, the quality infrastructure, access to good governance, skill development, those I think we need more discussion in some other forums or here. So I think I close there. These are my observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The organizers have reminded me that we only have 5 more minutes to go. So I'm going to now request Mr. Sanyal to take up the question Dr. Vijayalakshmi posed, and of course others can also chip in. May I ask you to sort of restate your question on geopolitics, the first question that you posed.
Roughly what it is, just to remind you.
Just to remind you about the accommodative aspect. How do we diplomatically convince others? What I'm seeing is multipolar world is not a reality. It's a developing situation. We are yet to reach there. In that, multilateral institutions are already at the whims of various countries. So how do we then allow, giving all the points that all of you made about anti-globalization, rising nationalism, protectionist forces, etc., how do we make others accept what we want to sell to them?
Go ahead.
So, as you can tell, I like anything maritime. So I'm going to use a maritime analogy. Let's say we are in a ship in a massive storm. Okay. Now, how exactly we deal with it, of course, depends on several things. First of all, we've got to be flexible. The winds are changing, the waves are coming from different directions, and so I can't give you a say that this is the thing to do. Sometimes we will have to make a choice that this is a wave we want to glide over. At other times we will have to do something else about it. But very important in all of this is to keep investing in making sure our ship continues to function well. So this is why a lot of this goes into what also Professor Dey also mentioned, because keeping our internal machinery functioning, we make sure the macro stability indicators don't get out of whack, that growth continues to be of some good momentum, which of course means we have to keep doing both structural and process reforms and keep this machine going. Meanwhile, how we deal with the rest of the world will have to be quite flexible. At some points in time, we will have to go for bilateral things. Other times where there is an opportunity. And I think here, freeing up our minds from some rigid doctrine is a very important part of how we will deal with this. So there will be areas where, of course, it may be worth our while to take up, say, our place as sort of a voice of the global south, whatever that means. But as Amita pointed out, we shouldn't get so stuck up on it that we give up our own interests. So this requires a lot of skillful maneuvering and willingness to take a few hits along the way.
Dr. Dey, you want to add something? No? So I can take a couple of quick questions from the audience, please. Just 1 second for the, please wait for the microphone, yeah.
Hello. Myself, Kumar Vishwas, former Joint Director, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas from Petroleum Planning and Analysis. Sir, question to Sri Sanyal. You have a weakness on maritime, what I find. What we find today's maritime business is most majority dependent on container services. And unfortunately, 80 to 90% is controlled by Chinese. In India, we have only one container manufacturer which has come up very recently in Gujarat. You spoke about manufacturing of shipping industry and other activities. How we are going to tackle in that area? Containerization services. Thank you.
So of course, a very important part of this is that we own and build our own containers. And if you will have seen that we have now got some more on the way. So we will be getting into not just shipbuilding but containers as well. So this is something that is in our radar.
So my name is Sankalp. Sir, we always compare our economy with Chinese economy.
So, to whom is your question directed?
So Sanjeev Sanyal, sir, because I think he will be the apt person to answer that. To my mind, what China's model is to steal the tech, targeted sector of any nation. Let's say you talked about shipbuilding. They have targeted Germany. They made a plan from the 90s. Now they are the leaders, control 60% of the market. Their model, of course, is steal tech, do reverse engineering, do mass manufacturing.
So we know about what China is doing. So what's your question?
So my question is, what does that stops Indian policymakers to think in the same direction? Why we do not have the methods and mechanisms to target the sector, to do the reverse engineering? Why do we shy away openly doing what China has done if we want to be China? Thank you, sir.
Targeted efforts, including re-engineering or inviting foreign companies to India with technology transfer agreements. All of these are things, of course, I mean, entirely in favor of the fact that Indians come up with their own technology. Sometimes that requires us to learn from others, and I am very much in favor of learning from technologies from the rest of the world as well in order to develop our own. And sometimes we may not entirely succeed, in which case we may have to buy it from other people. Point I'm making is we need to upgrade, and we should not be shy of using whatever tools are required to move up the value chain.
Just to add to the gentleman on the petroleum ministry.
Sure.
On the shipping,
Yeah.
if you look at the ocean transportation statistics, these data I request also to Mr. Sanyal and Mr. Chair to release to the public audience. Top 3 carriers, container carriers, is not Chinese. It is one, the Swiss is company called MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company. Second was the French shipping company called CMS CGM, and third is, the company which is Danish called Maersk. The Chinese are actually not handling our container. Where we are lacking is, you may ask a question, is the container boxes which we see at the manufacturer? Perhaps my view is that you don't need to you don't need manufacturing all those things. It's basically we need a bigger Indian player managing the transportation. Thank you.
All right. So in the interest of time, I will not be able to take any further questions, and I'll just use a couple of minutes to make my closing remarks. So the title of the session was India's Economic Ascent and Implications for the World, right? So a month ago, there was a gentleman called Utsav Baijal, who apparently was part of the government between around before the COVID, before the around 2018-19, and he said he was a participant or a part of the audience in a very famous podcast in the US called the All In podcast, and they have an annual gathering similar to the Omega gathering of the famous investor Warren Buffett. There were 4 venture capitalists in the US. They are well known. I don't have to go through their names right now. And it is sort of a standard fixture in the American business conversation. This is somewhere between Davos and TED in terms of importance. And the point he made in that conversation, it is not that India was mentioned in negative terms or condemned or criticized for what it is doing or not doing. He said the problem he faced was that India was invisible in the room. And his post might have gone viral. Some of you may have seen it already. So India wasn't mentioned. Whereas according to him, in that conversation, China was mentioned some 50 odd times, etc. So in other words, there is no denying the progress we have made from a $300 billion economy in 1993 to $3.9 trillion economy as of March 2025. And I have made this point many a time myself to audiences that per dollar of debt, India has generated more GDP than China has per dollar of debt. You can compare that by looking at the debt to GDP ratio of both the economies. The total non-financial sector debt of India as a ratio of GDP and for China as well. So we have done well. Capital efficiency has been better, and innovation indices we have moved ahead compared to where we were 10, 11 years ago. Infrastructure, as you traveled in many other countries, including in some developed ones, you realize that our airports are actually far better, etc. We have done well in some areas. We should not be shy of being proud of what we have done, because you have to build on your successes as much as learn from failures. That is fine. But more importantly, one of the things that we can learn from China, apart from the other macroeconomic achievements or putting things up on scale, etc., they raise their head slowly, and they raise their head too prominently only after the 2008 financial crisis happened. And even there, some of us correctly feel that they raise their head too early, the Chinese. So in that sense, have we built companies, have we built institutions, whether it's academic or non-academic, commercial or non-commercial, that the world cannot do without today? How much have we translated our economic achievements and our progress into leverage today, and what more do we need to do to create that kind of strategic indispensability? A small company like ASML or ARM in the UK, or TSMC in Taiwan, or Applied Materials in the United States, if they were to shut down, the world will come to a standstill. Do we have an enterprise that if it were to shut down, the world would come to a standstill? We don't have one at the moment. We have a lot of useful to have companies or enterprises. So I think it's important that even as we are very keen to announce our arrival, we need to make sure that we have actually arrived before we announce our arrival. And that is the task for us in the next 25 years. And that is when, regardless of what you say, the world will actually then notice that you have arrived and will have to find ways to fit themselves into the order that India would then define. But that task is ahead of us, not behind us. And therefore, as Sanjeev said, in his remarks, he's not that he's asking for us to go back to the ambassadors and the fiats of the world. And to another question he pointed out, and as Professor Batra said, how is it that we are going to participate in WTO? What is the model of our engagement? How do we then remain open to innovations and competition from outside? Dr. Day spoke about the importance of inclusive growth as well. So all these elements are not contradictory to each other, but they have to be woven together to be able to create an economy that is indispensable to the world. That is when we could say we have ascended. And the implications for the world, then it will be up to the world to figure out how to fit themselves into the framework that India would have defined by then. So all of us have a role to play in our own ways, starting from making sure that we are physically, mentally, emotionally fit in a world of social media and obsessive screen time consumption, etc., to being economically productive, to skilling, to investing in R&D, innovation, etc. Multiple things we need to do. So let's be clear about what we have achieved, and let's be even clearer about what we need to do. Then our ascent will be not a topic of discussion, but a matter of reality. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you for being active participants, and my thanks to all the three panelists. Please put your hands together to applaud them for their contribution. I wish you all more stimulating conversation in the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the organizing committee, I thank our distinguished panelists and chair for such an insightful discussion, with at least one notion in common, that India's economic rise has eventually enhanced our global stature, comfortably or at times in an uncomfortable confrontation. With this, we conclude the session. I request all of you to remain seated as we start the next session very soon. Thank you.